Debian Buster. And replace the repo. If you're coming straight from Windows and you like keyboard shortcuts, Control-Shift-V. Control-V. At least in a terminal. To copy on Firefox, it's still Control-C, but then Control-Shift-V. Alright. So now... Okay. Okay. So we just upgraded all the repository sources from Debian 10, from Buster to Bullseye. And save the file here. It looks like this is working. That's right. What am I doing? General rule of thumb. There we go. Yeah. I've heard the point be made before that one of the hardest things about switching from Windows to anything else is switching out of the Windows mindset of what exactly an operating system is and how it's all laid out and how it's presented to you. Linux is so open-ended and it's so down to the fine grain. It's a bit like asking someone who bought a car what kind of nuts they'd prefer to hold down their engine block when they might more be concerned with, you know, maybe what the engine is, how many cylinders it has. Then a lot of people might just be looking for you know, the right music player in the dashboard or a sunroof. And they would have no opinion, or would they really care what the bolts look like that are holding the engine down. course, everyone knows the bolts holding the engine block down are among the most important components of a car. But it's not exactly the first thing that comes to mind. And such is the case with Linux versus Windows and Mac. Maybe the people using Macs, they're the people that care about sunroofs and dashboards. And then on the other hand, you have the very hardcore Mac people who operate out of a terminal just like this. Some people grew up on Macs and they swear by them. I think the Apple II is a fine machine. Otherwise, I'm kind of indifferent. I just don't like spending a lot of money to get a nice, functional computer. As is the case right here. Hell, if anything, you might have to take a cue out of the MacBook, no pun intended, and have something that is very, very approachable and easy to use for someone who they're looking for a sunroof in a car and they're not looking for the engine mounts. Give them a good sunroof and then, sneak the good engine mounts in. Because otherwise, they're gonna keep looking for a sunroof and maybe, just maybe, they might get sold a lemon. You know what I mean? They'll give you the one or two features that you're looking for, and then they'll sneak another 20 in. And I'll tell you. I keep saying I'll tell you like I'm Rodney Dangerfield, but gotta do something about, especially about Windows. Really gotta do something about Windows. I think Windows 2000 is my favorite. Then Windows 7. Then probably, I guess, 9X or XP. Everybody really likes Windows 98 2nd Edition. And they really like Windows XP. I used XP for well over a decade. XP was a great operating system. When I think about it, it's just a slightly more bloated version of Windows 2000. And Windows 2000 had a nice look to it. Windows 2000 was all over the place. I think if you went into a hospital or a working environment in the first half of the 2000s, it was everywhere. and I guess that's a pretty obvious thing to say. Around 2005, there was a sudden shift. I don't know if you guys remember the Zotobe worm. I remember seeing that happen live on CNN. I believe it was in August of 2005. Their entire newsroom got attacked by this worm because all their computers were running Windows 2000. And then basically the breaking news was that they couldn't break the news because their computers were down, so they had to get news the old school way. I wonder if that's the last time they actually had to get news that way. Unless maybe for if their power went out during Hurricane Sandy. Not sure. But shortly after the Zotobe worm, Z-O-T-O-B worm, Windows 2000 just kind of vanished off the face of the earth. Didn't really see it. It was still bundled with business class computers into probably late 05. I think Windows needs gaming and it needs Office if it's going to survive until 2030. And of course Windows is going to survive, but I mean survive as a modern competitive operating system. I can't stress how much more usable Linux is. Sure, I had some hang-ups when I first was trying to add my user account to the sudo group, and it's a little different on Debian compared to other distros, so I've gotten more familiar with the way Fedora or say Red Hat or CentOS. Didn't they get rid of CentOS? Well, let's just say Fedora. I got a little more accustomed to that. But it's just a different flavor of things, and the more you play around with different distros, the more you kind of get a feel for, how everything works. Somewhat of a I have wanted to use Gentoo as a daily driver operating system for a long time now, and my only point of concern I guess it's kind of ironic. I want to try Gentoo, especially on older hardware that's weaker, where compiling from source everything would lead to some drastic optimizations. Potentially drastic, and otherwise it generally does just lead to a nice improvement in performance. But at the same time, having an old CPU compile everything, that seems like it would just run the computer into the ground a lot faster. Now, in all fairness, you can use a more powerful computer. You can get a Threadripper and set it up to compile for a ThinkPad T42 from 2003. You could get a really high-end CPU and then have it compile the source code for something much older, and it would compile it like that. In time. I think this would be a good Gen 2 computer. The CPU is powerful, not in the current year sense. It's not, it's a Ryzen 5. Isn't that the go-to now? Intel's become kind of a joke, and AMD has quickly wedged them out of the top spot, and I guess we'll see if Intel comes back. This has happened before, and if anything, it was this architecture here, where Intel climbed back up and came back on top. Intel's management, the staff, the way the company's run, it's changed quite a bit since the mid-2000s. So I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get away with making the same mistake twice. Because in all fairness, when Intel screwed up in the 2000s, they were going on what they genuinely believed to be the best design path. They were projecting to have CPUs that had double-digit clock speeds, if I remember right. Like, they were shooting for 20 gigahertz processors, single core, and potentially adding more pipelines to the mix. And that was taken to its upper limit with the Pentium 4 and the Pentium D. These processors that I've talked about casually before in some of these videos. It was all taken to the limit there, and they realized that there was just not, it wasn't sustainable as an architecture. And then they had to backtrack to the Pentium 3 based architecture, and they went with cores, and they went with a more simplistic pipeline. And then they took some of the technologies from the abandoned NetBurst architecture, like, say, hyperthreading, and eventually they embedded that into, the modern CPUs, which ultimately, if I remember right, derived from the Tualatin Pentium 3s, the final version of the Pentium 3. And the Pentium 3, of course, has its basis in the Pentium Pro. But I don't think Intel's problems of that era and this era are one and the same. Okay. Do you know what I'm gonna do? See, I have this this cool IBM keyboard here. I think this is from an Aptiva. It's no Model M, but it's still a pretty nice, cool keyboard. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna see if I can map some keyboard combo to the moon button, the suspend button. Windows 95 had a suspend, and the monitor had a moon icon on it, and that's where that comes from. So, even though this is kind of unnecessary, let's go back into LX Hotkey. And how about super and nah, that's not gonna work. Super and home. So now, super home. No such file or directory. Okay. While we're here, let's see if Windows 10 still works. Windows 10 still works. Man, if that ain't a choice background picture. I figured I have Halo the Master Chief Collection. I have Halo Reach. I don't have the whole thing. Maybe I should have just bought the whole thing, but I really don't play games that much anymore. Alright, let's get out of Windows. Let's go back to Debian. So this one's called Bullseye. Sweet. There's BPYtop. Really like BPYtop. While I'm here, I'll install a couple different packages. I'm going to go back into root. I keep typing in sudo when I'm signed in as root. Gotta stop doing that. Control D. Now I'm logged out of root. If I type in BPYtop, I get this cool resource manager. It shows me basically everything that's in use. This is where Linux is really nice. Here I'm only using a gig of RAM, and still got a lot of free space. This, I think, is where Linux really has a future. Because sure, hardware gets more powerful, but the longer you rely on hardware scaling, the more you gradually lose position to whoever optimizes better and codes better and makes better use of the hardware. If someone has 4 gig of RAM, using Windows now on 4 gig of RAM, I mean, it's the minimum requirement for Windows 11, but even using Windows 10, an older version of Windows 10 on 4 gig of RAM, the OS is overkill for 4 gig of RAM. When you go back a couple years, 4 gig of RAM was still quite generous. And more than likely, Windows 11 will become a lot more intensive and make 8 gig of RAM kind of weak. And then 16 gig of RAM will all of a sudden be the new minimum. And people say that's absurd now, but, you know, they also said that needing 48 megabytes to run Windows 95 smoothly was also absurd, and that no one was going to do that. So that's just the way that goes. I really like this resource manager here.